Hello, thank you for joining us. Welcome from me, Michael Scott, normally in Oxford, where I believe today it's raining cats and dogs, but I'm happily in France in the sunshine. And welcome also from my joint convener, Sanford J. Ungar in Washington, D.C. This is to the 59th jointly promoted event between the Future of the Humanities Project and the Free Speech Project. The latter is sponsored by Georgetown University and the former by Georgetown's Humanities Initiative in association with Campion Hall, Oxford, and the Las Casas Institute for Social Justice at Blackfriars Hall, Oxford. Together, the two projects consider issues concerning human dignity, rights, cultures, histories, traditions, and freedoms in a wide spectrum of educational activity, policy, expression, and aspiration. In a moment, I'll hand over to Sandy, who is the director of the Free Speech Project at Georgetown. He will introduce today's distinguished guests and moderate the ensuing discussion before I return to chair the question and answer session. From the start, you can type in questions to the panel by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please use the Q&A button, not the chat one. These will come to me during the session, and I will try to put them to the panel to consider. We urge you, please, to ask questions as and when they occur to you, so that there is not a bottleneck at the end. Looking forward to this discussion. Over to you, Sandy.
Thank you very much, Mike, and a good day to everybody. We have a great variety of people on our panel today. I will introduce them briefly. Father Mark Bosco, who's the Vice President for Mission and Ministry at Georgetown University and a revered teacher of undergraduate students at our institution. Ian Finlay is a fellow of Harris Manchester College at the University of Oxford, has a background in several fields, including theology. He previously taught in Scotland, and he is a member of the Oxford Congregation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, generally known as the Mormons in this country. Howard Robinson is a senior research fellow at Blackfriars Hall at Oxford and professor emeritus and provost emeritus at the Central European University, which I believe was in Budapest at the time that he was working with it. Suhag Shukla is the executive director and co-founder of the Hindu American Foundation, a leading voice for education and human rights. And she also happens to be a lawyer based in Philadelphia. I'm going to begin in our usual manner by asking some questions, and we'll see where the discussion takes us. And I'm going to start with Mark Bosco because this might seem like a cheeky question to ask at a university, a Catholic university at that, whether overall in the world, religion is helping solve problems or making them worse. And Mark, I'd love to hear from your vantage point an answer to that general overall question, whether it's becoming easy to think of moments when religion has not been a good tool of diplomacy, but are there still some that we need to pay attention to?
Thanks, Sandy, and good to be with you. Well, I was thinking through this, and I work with an array of interfaith chaplains. Here we have Dharmic communities, Jewish communities, Muslim communities, Catholic, Protestant, in many different ways. And seeing them work together, I see the value of religion creating a space for deeper conversation and a kind of articulation of values that transcend often one religious tradition. I always say to my folks in my department that 80%, 86% of the global population, they adhere to some faith, right, or some spiritual tradition. So if it's 86%, that means we're going to have to engage them. That's an aspect of their experience of being who they are. So I think in the world, having that sense of a global sense that people of faith are actually engaged, whether it's politically or it's socially or it's economically, that these things are really important. So have we done some things that I think in the name of religion? Yes. But I think it's been because religion's been weaponized more by politics than it is about a religion kind of being the source of that kind of conflict. So I would just say ultimately, I think it's a source for good. And coming out of my Jesuit Catholic background, I think Pope Francis and the Vatican actually, as a kind of institutional way of trying to manage and shape that conversation, has been pretty impressive. I'm not sure how always effective, but it's an impressive kind of stance to say religion can actually lead one and lead a country, lead people to put their values actually at work, right? To accelerate some kind of change, social change, things like that.
Thank you. Suhag Shukla, I wonder what your perspective is on this. There are Hindu activists in history. Mahatma Gandhi is one who stands out, who certainly is remembered as a man of peace. And sometimes, Mark used the word weaponized, sometimes the Hindu religion gets weaponized like so many others do. What is your perspective here?
So I think that the simple answer to the question is it depends. And what I think it depends on, especially in the realm of international relations, is one, who's at the table, and what values are they bringing? So the leaders that are engaged in diplomacy and international relations, they're going to carry their own personal beliefs, but those personal beliefs are very closely related to cultural or civilizational ethos because I don't necessarily believe that you can have clean compartments of, say, private belief systems and then communities and then societies because individuals make up communities, communities make up societies, societies make up nations. And so the relationship between personal religious beliefs and how they might manifest publicly are both unavoidable and they're inextricably linked. So, who's at the table? And what I mean by that is when we look at some of our international bodies where a lot of conversations are happening about conflicts between nations or other pressing issues that are affecting humanity, there isn't necessarily been equal representation of the variety of worldviews that can potentially offer solutions to these problems. So one is who's at the table. The second piece is what type of values are they bringing? And I think that where, at least from my vantage, I've seen religion being a force for good is where universal values, specifically pluralism and our interconnectedness, whether, for my tradition, in the Hindu tradition, the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that the world is one family, or the Jesuit idea of men and women for others, that, there's a calling for all people to serve one another as being members of a universal family. I think these types of universal values are critical for us to be able to shape a positive manner in which religion shapes international relations and diplomacy.
Thank you. Howard Robinson, you are above all a philosopher, and you teach philosophy at Oriel College at Oxford. And so this is a subject I suspect you've thought quite a bit about.
Well, I'm not a moral or political philosopher, so it's more whether we can see the external world and what the mind is that I have written about. But I'm obviously interested in these issues. It might depend on how a particular religion sees its method of spreading. For example, Judaism early on was a matter of conquest, but once it had conquered its holy land, it was defensive. Some of that conquest mentality seems to have returned to the Israeli government, hence calling the West Bank Judea and Samaria. The early history of Islam seems to be very much that way. With Christianity, because it was the enemy of the state for the first 300 years, conversion has tended not to be of that sort, except when it moved to other continents. By that I mean like America and that kind of thing. But even there, and in Africa, it was mainly a matter of conversion. So the very background thing is that kind of notion of how you preserve and extend your religion. Now, how that relates to present issues, and in the case of Russia and Ukraine, the Russian church clearly sees it as part of its mission to Holy Mother Russia to be just about as large in the Slavic world as it possibly can be. Putting aside the fact that Cyril, the patriarch, was also a KGB man like Putin, they have that kind of picture. And because in the 17th century, you've got the religious wars between Protestants and Catholics. That element, though, the English government tended not to want to go to war on the continent for the sake of religion. It was the Puritans who did. So it varies with that kind of thing. And it also, of course, varies with the kind of thing that Suhak said, that, and also that the general religious ethos that Father Mark said, which you find in universities, is not necessarily the same as national sentiment. American evangelicals are not seem to want to have an end of the world war over Israel. So it's very varied, but it does depend upon the culture of the religion when it comes to how you expand and defend yourself to some extent.
Of course. Ian Finlay, the Mormons have been remarkably successful in spreading their word. It is almost impossible to grow up in America without coming across some young Mormon missionaries at some stage who seem to perform a duty that they rejoice in taking that role.
No, I think you're right there. I mean, we do proselyting is a major part of our faith, but there is another part that's much less visible, and that is our humanitarian work. Mormon charities last year spent almost $1.5 billion worldwide. Now that's very significant in an era when both the British and the American governments are pulling back on development work. I mean, I know, of course, our own church isn't unique in this. The CAFOD, the UK branch of the Catholic Charity, spent about 67 million last year, and of course, Catholicism in the UK is a relatively small compared with Anglicanism. So one of the, and as a sort of empirical social scientist, I'm very interested in the numbers and how you can actually measure the impact of religions, and in a whole range of areas, not just Latter-day Saint charities, Catholic charities, Muslim charities. I mean, there's a really interesting fact, that just as I was preparing for this, I was thinking most of us in the West who keep up with the press could give a definition of jihad. It probably wouldn't be a definition that some active Muslims would adhere to, but we could give a definition of jihad. How many of our fellow religionists could give a definition of zakat? Now, zakat is the Muslim only one of the forms of charitable giving, and yet there are far, far more active Muslims who pay zakat than there are who engage in the kind of jihad that we read about in the press so often. I mean, and that's true across a whole range of areas. You know, the Catholic Church has been castigated along with the Anglicans for the way they've dealt with priests who've abused children and others, and yet there are far more Catholic priests and Anglican priests who are ministering to the poor and needy and to their congregations in very respectful and positive manners. So I think one of the problems that we have is with perception, that the press likes to get a good juicy story, and juicy stories are not stories about how the Mormon Church has reduced infant mortality through its education programs in developing countries. So I think it's very important that we not just as a Mormon church, but all our religious organizations make clear that we are there to minister to the poor and needy, to minister to those in need. We're not there to bring down governments or to set up caliphates or these other very negative things that we read about in the press.
Well, a good point. The image of religion in the media is not always as favorable as the leaders would like it to be, and some of the research that gets published indicates that there's a religious decline. A recent paper published in Nature magazine, which is a scientific magazine, using data from the Pew Trust, theorized that countries around the world have experienced a common sequence of religious decline. And I wonder who wants to take this question and ask.
Can I just take that up, Sandy? Because
Sure.
I've read that Pew report, and it's become part of the conventional wisdom. But I've also read much more recent reports that Generation Z, as we call it in Britain, or Generation Z in America, are actually turning away from atheism. They're turning back to organized religion because they're looking for value systems where they can have some certainty, some guidance in their life that's beyond the material world.
I want to agree with Ian there. I think I was reading a report from Davos, actually, that's where I got the 86% of people will say that they really belong to a faith or a spiritual tradition. And that's a lot. That's a lot of people. And I do see even I know it on college campuses, but you see it in the New York Times, you see it in other things. There is a sense that this generation is actually looking for, especially after COVID, I think, is looking for a kind of moral compass. And the superficial and the soundbite kind of sense of religion is kind of lost on them, because really what religion has become to journalists is they're political. They only can understand. It seems to me that most journalists just understand religion as a political reality, not as a community of faith, not as a historical reality of faith. And I think I see students, it's all anecdotal at Georgetown, where I am, but I see an increase in interest and a real sense of trying to live deeper lives at this moment in time.
I'll add something about this, that often the paper admits to, Hindus and Buddhists being underrepresented
Yeah.
because they don't necessarily fall into the definition of organized religion. They're decentralized wisdom traditions. And that's the case for so many indigenous or ancient traditions. But using Pew data, actually, one of the latest studies found that Hindus in India and Bangladesh, for instance, where there's significant numbers, there's a 99% retention rate, so to speak. We don't have disassociation as an issue. Where we do is in the United States. The United States was probably the outlier in that 18% of people raised as Hindus no longer identify as Hindu, and that of that 18%, I believe it was 11% kind of fall into this nuns category, and a small number began identifying as Christian. But anecdotally, what I'm seeing, whether it's on social media, whether it's in community programming, both here in the United States as well as in other diasporas, is that there's a revived interest in religiosity. And specifically from the Hindu tradition, there's so many practices that support mental health, that support more holistic living, whether it's the diets that we have or the way that we understand the connection between mind, body, all these things, or even things that are not necessarily directly related, like ancestral practices or festivals. I mean, my Instagram feed is filled with educational material. Some of it's better than others, but the fact is that there is an audience for this. And so I see this maybe more as a transition from how we have traditionally or historically defined religion, to, still trying to find meaning. And that might be through community and through churches or through temples, or it might be in different forms through more open exploration that kind of takes a food court approach to religion, I guess, and picks and chooses and finds what resonates. And it's not as much about doctrine or dogma, but what really resonates and gives people a lasting impact.
Howard, given your pan-European experience, I wonder what you have observed about the adherence to religion or the abandonment of religion in old Europe.
Yeah, just to first comment on that, Shahag's last remark. In England, it's said that the Catholic attendance is going up and conversions are going up. And the Dominicans have got 8 new novices coming into their Cambridge house next year, which is almost unknown. And they've had to convert the attic for extra rooms. Unfortunately, the Jays are not finding this this thing in Europe. So that's and that would not be about a general religiosity. On the whole, if they come into the Dominicans, they've usually got first-class degrees and have very precise ideas, or at least relatively precise ideas, orthodox rather than sentimental, so to speak, or sentimental and orthodox. So that's interesting. On the continent, well, I was an Anglican most of the time. I was in Budapest, and we had a small congregation there. The Hungarian Catholic Church, and indeed even worse, the Calvinist Church, was pretty hard-line nationalist and a strong supporter of Viktor Orban. Was not a wonderful thing. In the experience I had in Vienna, where I'm going in a few weeks' time, I'll be traveling there on my 80th birthday on October the 2nd.
Happy birthday.
The English-speaking congregation, led by an English Redemptorist, has about 200 people in the morning from every shape and size. I mean, all the countries in the world, and similarly a very large congregation in the evening. So that seems to be flourishing, but it doesn't seem to be flourishing among the Austrians themselves so much. I think you'd find all kinds of different things wherever you went, but the French say that it's on the up again a bit. So
how about these offices of international religious freedom? There's one in the US, there's one in the UK, there's one in the European Union. Has tolerance among different religious faiths increased in Europe, as far as you can tell?
I was involved in the Commonwealth Council for Freedom of Religion and Belief and writing a report for them, and it was really looking at what actually works in promoting freedom of religion and belief. Because I mean, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, many of the European Western countries, freedom of religion and belief, at least in theory, is practiced, but that's not true, across the world. One of the conclusions that we came to was really, I suppose, not really that optimistic. And that was that the kind of things that work tend to be fairly small scale and time limited. So they work with small groups of people, Christians and Muslims getting together, or Jews and Muslims getting together. They work very effectively in those small scale, but actually building those up to much larger scale activities, it is very challenging, and that was disappointing. I mean, we studied schemes all over both the east and the west, the south and the north, in global terms, and that was our conclusion. I hope others have maybe more optimistic or positive findings from their work on freedom of religion and belief.
Are there some other examples that you'd
If
like
I
to cite?
can, I'll weigh in on this because I've written a lot about the U.S. Commission on
We'll come to you in a moment, Mark.
Sure.
sorry. So on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, I think it suffers. It's not good news. So I apologize. It's not positive as you had hoped, but I think it suffers the same fate as even the UN in terms of inconsistency, double standards, a lack of transparency, lack of representation. So while there's good work happening on the ground, I don't know that these overarching bodies are necessarily highlighting or supporting the work that's happening on the ground that's positive. And I think someone raised earlier that religion gets a bad rap because it gets intertwined with politics. To me, USERF is a classic case of that, where initially, even though the United States is a secular democracy, the first pushes to even establish the office were to monitor persecution against Christians around the world. That's a very lofty, worthy endeavor, except that as a secular democracy, the United States should care about all religious minorities and all religious persecution. And that kind of root motivation or the catalyst doesn't seem extricated, even though the scope of USERF is to monitor persecution against all religious minorities or where things are happening. And I think it starts from representation. Since 1998, you have 50 Protestants or mainline Christians, 20 Catholics, about roughly 20 Jewish representatives, 10 Muslim, 2 Hindus, 1 Buddhist, 1 Baha'i. We're talking about 1/3 of the global population. Now, if it was the U.S. Commission on American Religious Freedom, sure, it makes sense that it should represent the American population where, Hindus, for instance, are less than 1%. So that would be fair. But we're talking about the world. And so I think that people, when we build these bodies, we need to make sure that we're talking, we're creating the proper framework for it to be representative, inclusive, and also with the understanding that just because you have one person representing the religion, that religion and that community is not a monolith. There's going to be a variety of priorities, a variety of problems that need to be addressed. And I think there is kind of the core problem to some of these international bodies.
Mark.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I sometimes think that where religion and religious faith traditions and institutions work best is as mediating kinds of bodies, mediating institutions that are kind of faith-based. So I'm thinking of kind of peace studies. I'm thinking about, it's the Anglican Church who kind of helped apartheid find a way through, right?
Good point.
World. And I was just in Bogota in Colombia and talking to some of my Jesuit fellows there, and really getting the peace 2014 peace pact going. They really went to the church and said, okay, you can mediate between the guerrillas and the government. Who's the person who's going to do that? So I think in that regard, maybe not at the institutional level, these big kind of international offices that brings people together, they lack a kind of a power to implement anything. And so you leave there thinking, I've talked it out with people who are preaching to the choir, you might use in my faith tradition. But in terms of those mediating things, whether it's Northern Ireland whether it's Africa, in Rwanda, the churches and the temples, the religious communities have played an important part in moving beyond the war, or moving beyond apartheid, moving beyond, or trying to create a new space.
That you mentioned Latin America, and it makes me think about liberation theology and what an important role it's played. And I'm drawn to point to the election of the last two popes now, having had a background in working as missionary theologists in Latin America, two in a row,
Yeah.
which is quite interesting. Is that what do you read as the importance of that?
That this is a Catholic community that's been kind of overlooked by a kind of European hegemony on how it was going to be in the world in the Vatican, and by bringing that kind of lived experience of the real terror in kind of dictatorships, the decline of dictatorships, the kind of the struggle still today for democracies to thrive there. I think there's a real sense of context, and a sense that the church needs to stand outside of that, but also then become a kind of a leaven for hopefully some social and political change. Yeah, I think it's really interesting that, and from my belief, the Holy Spirit has picked two people who were really engaged with working with what was best about faith traditions, working with the poor, trying to work with those who are sick, trying to keep those who are marginalized represented in the consciousness of politics. So yeah, I think it's been good. Leo, I think will continue in many ways, in his own way, that same kind of need to have faith be a healing remedy, a mediating remedy, as opposed to a problem that has to be solved or eliminated.
That brings me to the issue of evangelical Christianity in the United States, and how it seems to have come to be identified in political terms very strongly. And its alliance with Israel is an interesting issue as well. I don't expect only you to take responsibility for this question, Mark, but I wonder if anyone else wants to comment on this matter of evangelical Christianity, and whether has it impacted American foreign policy in a disturbing way? If it's our business to say what's disturbing and what's not.
I would let Howard then go, because I agree with Howard that in some ways it has become a rationale for some political maneuvers that and giving them some kind of a moral righteousness to the political actions of whether it be what's going on in Israel or other places. But I'd be interested to hear what other people say.
Suhag or Howard, please pick this up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, it's an aspect of the apocalyptic mentality of a lot of evangelicals. They're really looking forward to the end of the world, and they've got a very detailed account of how it's supposed to happen. And they tie it up with that, I think, and that's partly where it comes from. I don't know whether, say, 50 years ago, evangelicals would have been ultra strong Zionists or not.
I think not.
Yeah, it's something that's happened in the last 30 years or something of that sort. And it's not essential to them, but it's become very deeply embedded in a lot
But
of
it's
it.
it's not only that. There seems to be a coda of opinions and beliefs and policy positions that often come along with evangelical Christianity.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would say that where I've observed this is in a lot of the kind of culture wars, where it's access to healthcare for women, same-sex equality, or all those types of issues, where um, the American public has kind of spoken on where they stand, and policies have been passed to provide marriage equality. Or, well, we're seeing a different situation right now when it comes to access to abortion. But where some of these cultural battles were losing saliency in the United States, we've observed them being exported to places like Africa, places like South Asia or Southeast Asia, where criminalizing homosexuality and those types of laws that have passed in a number of African nations. There were conferences that were being funded by evangelical establishments from America, from Australia, and from Europe. So you, at least from my vantage, that's where we see that there's the influence that they wield here in the United States, but where it also extends globally.
What's the future of this trend? Mark, you're on mute, Mark.
So, sorry about that. I was responding to what Suhak said. I really think that it's important to say that there is a kind of sense of exporting a kind of ideology of a faith, and that's of course a fundamentalism and evangelicalism, and then most of these institutional bodies that are in conversations with governments are not. I don't know, I don't want to say rise above, but they're not usually that kind of missionary kind of agenda so much as how do we instead find common values so that we can actually, help shape a better world. And then I was just a tangent on this. I was with, again, some Jesuits who teach in India. And we were talking about the word secular versus, religious. And
Right.
they said, we love the word secular. We want this to stay in the Constitution of India, because if that goes, these 50 Jesuit schools are going to be under even more attack, right? So that it was like a light bulb went off in my head, though. I thought, oh yes, the world's becoming more secular. The world, oh no, secular is a value for the Christian community of colleges, and because it allows them to work. So it's interesting how each context is different and how it's being used and manipulated.
I'll just riff off of that real quick, if that's okay, on just the meaning of secular. So in the United States, when we talk about secularism, we see, to the extent possible, a separation between church and state. At least I fundamentally believe that church or religion is healthier without government interference, and government is going to come out with policies that serve all people across all backgrounds when religion is not meddling. But in places like India, for instance, secular, you'll hear in some circles that secular is a bad word. But I think even though we're all speaking English, we are coming from very different contexts. In India in particular, I'm not an expert, but secularism has been interpreted as creating different policy pathways for different religious communities, as opposed to having one law that applies to everyone. So even when we are talking about universal values, I think we have to have these types of conversations to talk to people across cultures. Well, what do you mean by secular? Because as an American, it means something very different than what it might mean in India or other places where secularism has taken on, because it's in some communities seen as favoring one group over others, which is what our system here avoids doing.
Ian, that's something here reminds me of the fact that when George Romney was a candidate for president of the United States against Barack Obama in 2012, if I'm not mistaken, there were people worrying about the implications, just as at one time people worried about the implications of a Catholic running for president. There were people who were worried about the implications of a Mormon running for president. And it was so shocking, really, to many people to think about that they were responding to some odd stereotypes that really had nothing to do with the religion itself.
Yeah, I think you're referring to Mitt Romney rather than his father, George Romney.
I'm sorry, you're quite right. Yeah. I'm showing my own age.
Yeah, George, of course, was I think a Treasury Secretary at one time, and a governor. But no, Mitt Romney he came across the same criticisms that JFK came across, really. When
Yes.
JFK was running, there were very strong concerns that his Catholicism would bleed into policy. And I mean, I'm in favour of any person who's qualified becoming the president of the United States. Sadly, you seem to have someone who isn't qualified at the minute, but that's you know, in itself is a political statement. But I, I actually think in the United States, it's probably much more likely to have a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints become president than it is to have an atheist become a president. Atheism seems to be much less in favour than almost any form of Christianity. No, one of the things that I think is important in this whole area is individuals who take their faith and use their faith, use the tenets of their faith to push for social justice. So we've already mentioned Mahatma Gandhi. We've mentioned, I mean, in Martin Luther King's another example. Desmond Tutu in South Africa. In Britain, I don't know, Howard may remember Monsignor Bruce Kent, who was a leading light in the
END.
In the campaign for nuclear disarmament. So very often religion is activated in the public sphere by individuals who have a very strong faith and who are willing to act on the principles of their faith. I've been very impressed by the last two popes, Pope Francis and Pope Leo. They seem to be both men who strike this wonderful balance between ministry and saying the right thing politically at the right time. You know, Pope Francis, I mean, one of his aphorisms is one that I frequently use in sermons that I preach in our own church, and that was, we pray for the poor, then we feed the poor. That's how prayer works. Which I think is just a beautiful way of expressing the relationship between intercession and active religion, active love. And I was reading a recent talk by Pope Leo, where he was talking about a vision that he had when he was on retreat, and he was being quite critical, not just of religion in general, but even of the Catholic Church. And he said that many of us who are religious, we really don't get it. And in this vision, he was led to a beautiful garden, and he saw what he explained to be the three churches that were acceptable to God: the church of truth, the church of service, and the church of intercession. And I just thought, yes, he has captured true religion perfectly. We seek after the truth, we seek to serve, and we seek to intercede through prayer and through fasting on behalf of everyone, really, including both Russians and Ukrainians, both Palestinians and Jews in Israel. And that just seemed to me to capture what religion's all about, for me anyway.
We're going to go in just a moment to Mike Scott for the questions that have come up, but a good chance for me to remind members of the audience from wherever they're coming from and whatever religions or perspectives they have, to submit questions if they haven't yet in the Q&A button. Howard, before we turn back to Mike, I want to know whether you're optimistic about this topic.
Well, in a fallen world, the devil holds most of the strongest cards. That's what a fallen world is. So you keep on pulling the ram's horns out of the thicket, but it always pushes back in again. And I don't know whether I'm optimistic or about what, about whether we'll survive, or whether
about the
time is
future
uninhabitable, or
about the future role of religion in solving some of these seemingly intractable problems that the world faces.
not very optimistic. I think the religious forces, or some of them, try to do their best on that, but it's difficult to find a case when it actually happens, I think, on a large scale. I mean, like the Ukraine war, or like the the Gazan war. Now, it's something like the Irish, as it were, troubles. People got fed up of fighting. Religious people were able to come in at that point and make.
Yes.
It's only when people, you could. It's like not having these, as Suhag said, these great big organisations that are there all the time don't necessarily do anything. But when the right sensitive people see that something can be done. I just want to ask one last remark that's slightly humorous about people being excluded. Richard Robinson, who was the philosophy fellow at Oriel from 1945 to nearly 1970, and a committed liberal imperialist atheist, would not write references for his Roman Catholic students to join the civil service because he said they owed an allegiance to a foreign power. Bought them for anything else. I mean, he wasn't hostile to them, and but he wouldn't. He thought they owed an allegiance to a foreign power, and that's and so Kennedy would have been the same from that perspective.
Yes. Well, Mike, perhaps you want to come back to the screen and moderate the questions from our participants around the country and the world.
Yes, thank
Hey
you.
there.
Thank you very much for an interesting debate. Got a question here. It's just disappeared as you talked. This is from an anonymous attendee who asks, could a source be provided for the claim that Generation Z is turning back towards religion?
Yes,
Part of the opening discussion. Ian.
yeah, that was from a YouGov poll that was conducted here in the United Kingdom. They did a poll in 2020 and another one this year, 5 years later, and their finding was that among 18 to 24-year-olds, the number that claimed to be committed to formal religion went up from 22% to 45%. The reasons they gave were increased faith, search for meaning, being part of a community, having increased hope in life, and a means to address crises in their life. So it's from a YouGov poll. If you presumably if you Google it, you'll find it. I don't have the exact reference, but that's where it's from. It's from a YouGov poll.
Is that related just to the United Kingdom, or
Yes.
is it just,
No, that particular poll was just the United Kingdom. Yeah.
is the same? Is it the same in the United States? Similar kind of.
I can only speak that maybe Suag knows more about it. I do know that there's a group of sociologists working out of Notre Dame and the University of San Diego, California, who have really been trying to track Gen Z, especially around questions of religion and spirituality. And they're showing the same kinds of same kind of differences that over the last 5 years, there's just really been an increase. And one has speculated in a post-COVID kind of moment, these young people are at a different inflection point. I can get that information for you, but I don't have it at the tip of my hands.
Thanks. Suhag, have you any
Yeah,
comments
I
on
was
that?
just going to say that the same thing. I think Gen Z, at least from some of the things that I've read, is confounding researchers because there was a steady decline, then to a plateau. I think, at least from some of the stuff that I've read, there's also gender differences where young
Yes.
men are attending church more than young women. So, one of the things with these studies, though, is that it's not giving us a reflection of this moment. It's on older data. By the time they write it, things have changed, and right now things are feeling like they're changing so rapidly. So, any data that I see, I take with a grain of salt, and continue doing whatever work I'm focused on. But they're certainly helpful. I think the idea that religion is dead, I don't see that in the near future, or even in the further future. I don't think that sort of decline is going to happen so quickly. I think religion will look different. It might feel different. And it, again, that depends on the continental context or whatever country context. But this data it at least it seems like for the United States, it's showing some sort of shift away from kind of the downward turn.
Do you think that's also related to peace and war? Are there would more people generally start to move back to religion if we were in a war situation, or felt that we could be in a war situation?
Well, I think as I said, I think the YouGov poll, the one of the things that the young people did bring up was a way of addressing crises, and particularly giving them hope during time of crises. So I think that hypothesis, at least partially holds, Mike.
Yeah. What about if the President of the United States just changes the title of the Pentagon to call it the Department of War? Never mind. Perhaps you won't go into that.
Mike, I want to say one thing though.
Yeah, please.
It is across religious traditions, and I know this is anecdotal, and we're a university where students have this intellectual ability to really grow and form relations. But I know for a fact that when we have Shabbat on campus, we have more students than ever before. We have more students attending Catholic Mass than we ever had before in the last 9 years. We had people out the door at our Dharmalaya. First time this year. We couldn't fit them in our space. Our Juma, our masjid is completely full. My generation is as surprised as anybody. Like, how are we gonna manage this? So, and I know it's anecdotal. It's not, but there is, if anything, there is a hunger, a real hunger for something happening with this generation.
Howard, do you find that the same in Oxford?
Well, as I was saying earlier on, if you go into any of the churches I see, the oratory, Blackfriars, the chaplaincy, they're always full. But whether they've ever not been full, I'm not sure about that. So yes, I'd say so. There's more religious activity, but I can't give you chapter and verse on that. Oxford's always been the kind of place where having religious arguments at dinner is part of the normal conversation.
Yeah, all right.
I just want to add that we haven't talked about the internet or social media. We've talked about war and peace, but I think while both of these things gave people the illusion that they're creating community, I think I'm beginning to see amongst the young people that we talk to that they are still craving face-to-face, in-person contact. And so, in addition to maybe some of the broader, bigger global issues that might lead them to asking existential questions and seeking them in community, there's also this other side of loneliness that's been driven by kind of the sense that you can create an online community. And I'm not saying you can't, but we're social beings, we're social animals, and that instinct has not gone away. So that might also be a contributing factor to seeing more people coming into in-person events, wanting to gather. And religion has been something that's age old that people have gathered around.
Mhm.
Fine. Thank you. Thanks for that. I'm going to go on to another question here, again from another anonymous attendee. It says, as someone who does not think organized religion, as someone who does think organized religion has outlasted its usefulness benefit, or perhaps never had enough to begin with, I frankly see it as more of a tool of societal control. Could you comment? That links up with another question, which says, in pronouncing that God was dead, Nietzsche commented that a new secular morality was needed to be found. Has it been found? Or are we suffering because of the lessening of Christianity in the world?
More questions, Mike.
Howard.
Well, if I ever got round, when I get towards 90, of writing another book or two, whether the suffering servant or the Nietzschean Superman is the sense of power, is the center of power in the universe, would seem to me to be the issue. And what happens with the Nietzschean project, it's entirely impossible to say what it is that is the energy based on the secularity that he believes in without it falling into thuggishness or something of that sort. D.H. Lawrence in all his novels tried to work this out, and it didn't work. So I don't think there's an alternative in that sense. The Nietzschean project is a dead end, and a dangerous dead end. Now, whether there could be a secular humanism, but then a secular humanism is a matter of people's taste. There is no objective ground behind it, it seems to me. And so that's the second question.
And I think
Oh.
I just think it's naive to think that, you know, religion is about controlling people, right? It offers a moral guidelines, it offers a way of being, it offers a kind of a way of proceeding in the world, whether it's Hindu or it's Christian or it's Muslim. And all this religion, anybody who does a theology or spirituality of religions knows that it's about a kind of a spiritual freedom to discover something about who you are in relationship to the world and ultimately to the divine. So I don't ever see religion, when I see religion said that it's you know, about social control, it's a naive understanding of religion. It's a naive understanding of those religious people who are allowing religion to control them. I do think that religion ultimately was an offer of freedom, a freedom from some of the ways in which we think we have to construct who we are, how we're going to relate. It gives us a freedom to move in and out of spaces, not confine us. Whether it's
Yeah, I
a
think
Mahatma Gandhi or it's a Martin Luther King, or it's an Ignatius of Loyola, you know. So
that's the ideal, Mark, but I think in practice, religions have been used by authoritarian governments as
yes,
means of social control. I mean, one looks at Modi's Hindu nationalism. One looks at the Christian nationalism that's becoming increasingly prominent in the United States. So I do think that the questioner has a bit of a point, that there's always a danger that religion, because it's such a powerful force, can be used as an instrument of social control. Now, you and I, Mark, know that's not the religion to which we ascribe. You know, we ascribe to a religion of service, of love, of truth. But I do think we always have to be aware of the danger. In my own faith tradition, we believe that the greatest gift that God gave us was agency, and anything that takes away our agency is of Satan, is of devil, is evil. So one has to balance these two tendencies: the proper promotion of love, of service, against the idea of social control.
agreed.
Thank you
wanna
for
just
that.
I wanna
Another question.
Yeah, I
Sorry.
just want to add something about just secular values. I think are they as much as religious values require commitment and human to human connection and service and transcending differences. I think secular values require that too. And at least in the United States, we are really coming to heads with ideas of free speech, equal protection, and due process. These are universal values that we as Americans are supposed to hold dear, but there are incidents that are happening in this country where I would question whether everyone believes in free speech. And of course, there's a conversation to be had that free speech will at some point come to heads with religious freedom and vice versa, or there are going to be competing rights. But even when we look at secular values, if we don't remind ourselves that there are people that are required to be connecting to one another on a human level to ensure that we can continue elevating these values. I don't see necessarily that secular values are uh, more beneficial or greater to religious values because they both require that same sort of human investment.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Another question. Again, everybody's wanting to be anonymous today, but how do you think the cafeteria approach to religion influences the way we see religion as impacting international problems? I feel we have seen this cafeteria approach to religion develop over the past 20 years or so.
I used the word so I can talk about it. um, so it's a tough question, and I'm just kind of going to go off the top of my head, but um, I think the cafeteria approach is the result of having a little bit of information about a lot of different things, as opposed to taking the time to really understand each pathway differently. Because as much as there are universal shared values across all religious traditions, there are inherent intractable differences, theological, philosophical disagreements between them. So, as far as the cafeteria approach, sure, if it allows you to then find a path and dive deep into it, I do think that there is a value to a deep dive. Cafeteria approach, in that sense, I think will keep you at a certain level. But if you really want to have the transformative effects that religion offers, it is important to go beyond that surface level. Once you get past that surface level, I think that's where inner transformation occurs, and that's where we can be better citizens, which then in turn affect our communities, our societies, and our nations. So that's my off the cuff answer to that.
Thanks. I'm going to come on to another question because we're running short of time now. And Sean Mavundia says, I'm a bit concerned about this passive role that has been mostly assigned to religion in this discussion. The panelists refer to religion as being weaponized. But my question is, what accountability, if any, does religion take for either not helping or exacerbating international problems? Going back to the title of the debate, of course. Who wants to take that?
I'm gonna take it because I'm gonna run out actually to go to class in a few seconds, and I might not be to hear the last questions, but I do think that in many ways this accountability needs to have a religious social structure that could allow that institution to speak for the sake of a religion. So I was thinking about Pope John Paul II in the year 2000, really asking for forgiveness from the Jewish community, right? A kind of accountability, and trying to do reconciliation in that regard. I think of the fact that you need institutions like Catholic universities, for example, that had slaveholding in the United States, and how you approach that. But you need to have that So to say that can religion just have accountability? It seems to me, no, you have to have at least some kind of structure, some authority that can speak on behalf of, and that is revered that way. So I think that at least in my faith tradition, I can see that through the papacy, things like that, through a hierarchy. But I do believe that we must be held accountable, and I think that the reconciliation activities in Rwanda, that the Catholic Church was very much exacerbated that problem by having priests from the different Hutu and Tutsis actually kind of helping those massacres. So the church had to come forward on that as well. So I think that the church, to say that a church can be accountable needs to say that it has a structure, a person, a unit that can speak on behalf of it. And sometimes we can't just say, well, all Muslims do this. No, because there's a million kinds of Muslims, right? But who can speak for the Muslim community at a moment of world or international kind of problem?
Thank you very much. I'm going to go on to another question, which is one that I'd expected to come up earlier, but it's come in as question 6 here. Una McKean. Can we spend a moment discussing the effect of religion on Israel-Palestine? Religious wars are not a new phenomenon and are a fundamental support of the argument for a separation of church and state. Howard.
Well, Netanyahu is not religious. He's always been a rather nationalistic Zionist. The Minister of Finance and the other one, whose names I always forget, are motivated by religion and seem to have the same values as the Book of Judges. The Gazans are under the ban, in effect. And that's very distasteful. So in that case, I think you've got secular Zionism has always had among its people people who were determined to get the whole lot, I think, and who'd find the Arabs impossible to deal with. Now, the Arabs have not made that job easy either, I don't think. So you've got a kind of militant secular Zionism, and you've got this belief that it's not the West Bank, it's Judea, Samaria. It's always really been ours. Arthur Balfour was very clear. He wanted to give the Jews somewhere to live, and it had to be dealt with in fairness to the people already there. That's getting worse and worse, and I don't think religions, the ultra-religious, are not helping that one little bit.
Ian?
Now, how far Hamas is driven by a jihadist form of thing rather than we want our property back, and if you can distinguish those things, goodness knows.
Ian?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole mix of religion, politics, and history involved in the conflict between Israel and Palestine. To read much of the current debate in the newspaper, you'd think it all started on October the 7th. It didn't start on October the 7th. It started way back at the turn of the 20th century. And that history, as I say, it covers a range of things. It covers, for example, things like social exclusion of one group by another group. It covers things like social otherness, othering people who aren't Jews or who aren't Palestinian, Arab, Christians, or Muslims as the other and as the threat. Both groups have legitimate concerns. The Israeli population, whether Jewish or secular, are concerned about having a strong Palestinian state next to them that they see could be a threat. The Palestinians, on the other hand, have a historic grievance going back to what they call the Nakba. When Israel didn't just take what it was given by the United Nations, but wanted to take much more, and it's this combination of history, geography, and religious differences that driving things. It's not just the religious thing, as Howard correctly says. I mean, I visited both Israel and the West Bank. There are many people in both groups who are not religious. The Palestinian Authority didn't adopt a fundamentalist Muslim position as Hamas has. So it's a very complex situation, and it's certainly not one that I have any solutions for.
Okay. So how did you want to comment on that at all?
I think everything has been said. It's complex.
Okay, I think we're just drawing to a close now, and Mark has just sent a note saying he's had to go to class. So thank you very much for such an interesting debate. Sandy, do you want to say anything before I wind everything up?
Words, Mike, this is one never knows with a subject like this whether we're going to have some new ideas or repeat old ones, and I think there were some new ideas and some very interesting exchanges, and we made an effort to have representatives of various religions, including some that don't get heard from very often in either of our countries. So I'm grateful to everybody who was a panelist and to the support we have by institutions at both ends. Number 59 of our series has been an important entry, and thanks to people who support you at Blackfriars, and thanks to the people who support us both at Georgetown University, Tom Banchoff, the Vice President for International Affairs, and others. This is something we're very proud of doing.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. The next free speech project at the Crossroads, International Dialogues event in association with the Future of Humanities Project, will be on October the 22nd. It's just a little bit later in the month than usual, but that's because there's a conference, a free speech conference earlier, which colleagues are going to be attending elsewhere. So it's on October the 22nd at 4 p.m. UK, 11 a.m. EST. And we're going to be discussing, is it ever necessary or desirable to revise history? Is it ever, Howard's interesting, he's going to join us, I bet. Is it ever necessary
Wondered
or
what it
desirable
Great
to
Does it mean
revise?
correct mistakes, or does it mean decide it'd be nicer if it happened differently?
Okay. The next Cultural Encounters books that have made a difference will be on October the 6th, when Tom Banchoff will be talking about Pope Francis's encyclical Fratelli Tutti. Can I just say that series, Vernon Press want to publish that book called Cultural Encounters, which actually there are a number of issues in that book dealing with very different religions that follow on from the debate we've had today. So it's a bit, but it won't be out until next year, Cultural Encounters. Anyway, on October the 6th in the Cultural Encounters series, Tom Banchoff will be talking about Pope Francis's encyclical Fratelli Tutti. For today, my thanks to the people at Georgetown, to Tom Banchoff, the people at Blackfriars, the prior, Dominic White, John O'Connor, the regent, and Hugo Slim, the new director of the Las Casas. Thanks also to Nick Austin, SJ, the master of Campion Hall. My special thanks to John McCabe for his work in administration. And I'd like to thank all those who have asked some very interesting questions today. Thank you all again to the panel, and thank you for attending today as members of the audience, and also, as ever, I'm grateful to Sandy Youngar, the director of the Free Speech Project at Georgetown. Special thanks to you, Sandy, because I know you haven't been too well over the last week. So thank you for being here today. I'm Professor Michael Scott, Fellow and Senior Dean at Blackfriars Hall, Oxford. You can follow me on Facebook as Michael Kerr Scott or LinkedIn as Professor Michael Scott. Until next time, take care and keep safe. Goodbye.
Thank you as always,
Thanks.
Mike.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.